Today we take a look at cell growth, division, and reproduction. All right, so let's take a look at cell growth, division, and reproduction. We're going to start off looking at describing some of the difficulties that a cell faces when it has to increase in size or as it increases in size. And I would wonder, have you ever considered why single-celled organisms are so small? And in fact, they're pretty much invisible to the naked eye. That's how small they are. So um, maybe think about why larger organisms like plants and animals are made up of trillions of little cells rather than having a much smaller number of larger cells. Like why are things the way they are? Why aren't they different? We're also going to look at the differences between asexual and sexual reproduction. And we're going to ask the question, is sexual reproduction associated with humans at all? Well, the answer to that is going to be an emphatic yes. In fact, cells throughout the human body basically reproduce asexually all the time, even though humans as whole organisms reproduce sexually. We're going to talk about those differences, so stay tuned. All right, let's get into our first topic. This is about cell growth. Now, we're going to start off with looking at one of the problems of a cell. And really, the main problem that a cell faces is its size. And cell size is really a matter of surface to area to volume ratios. Okay, so we're going to have to do a little math. So if we look closely at the problem on screen here, can you think of the cell as a cube? I mean, it's pictured there. I mean, that's not what cells normally look like, but go ahead and use your imagination and think of this cube as if it's just a normal cell. The reason we like to use a cube is because it's easy to do some calculations to find the surface area and compare that to the volume. Now, of course, we need to know the difference between surface area and volume. Of course, surface area is the outside, how much space is taken up by the outside. The volume, on the other hand, is the amount of space taken up on the inside of the object. Okay, so how much space it takes up. So in order to figure out the amount of surface area that we have to do a calculation. Now keep in mind that cubes are six-sided objects, so that's going to come into play. So we basically take the area of one side and then multiply it by 6 to get the volume in the case of a cube. Okay, so we're going to find the area of each side by just simply multiplying the length times the width. Now, this cube makes it nice and easy because the width is 1 centimeter. Okay, 1 centimeter with the width and 1 centimeter with the height. Okay, now if we multiply that together, we get 1, right? 1 square centimeter. Okay, so here's what that formula looks like. All right, so volume, well, the surface area of the cube is the length times the width, and then we have to multiply it by 6 because there's 6 sides. Okay, so length times width gives us the surface of a square, the surface area. But then we're looking at a cube, which is three-dimensional, so we have to multiply all sides to get the total. Okay, so that is the formula we are going to use for the surface area of a cube. So we basically end up with 6 square centimeters of surface area. because 1 times 1 times 6 is 6. In order to figure out the volume of the cube, we're going to take the length times the width times the height, and that's going to give us our volume, basically the amount of space that the object takes up. So we're going to calculate that out, and you see that we get 1 centimeter times 1 centimeter times 1 centimeter equals 1 centimeter cubed, not cubed, yeah, cubed. 1 centimeter cubed, that's what the 3 means. The 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter for the surface area, then times 6 is going to give us 6 centimeters squared. So 6 square centimeters, okay? Like 6 square inches, but we're measuring in centimeters. All right, so now how does this relate to cells? So notice that we have 6 centimeters squared of surface area, but we only have 1 centimeter cubed of volume. So the surface area actually is a very large number compared to the volume. Now let's take a couple different examples and let's look at what happens as the cube begins to grow, right? We started with a 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter cube. Now it's doubled in size to get to 2, right? So let's take a look at some of these formulas. We'll use the same formulas we used before, except now we're going to figure out the answer. Okay, so surface area for this cube is going to be length times width times 6, right? So we would do 2 times 2 times 6. Okay, so 2 times 2 is 4. 4 times 6 is 24. So there's our answer. Now volume is going to equal 8 centimeters cubed. So that's going to be 2 times 2. Why is my ink disappearing? 2 times 2 times 2. 2 times 2 is 4. 4 times 2 is 8. That gives 8 centimeters cubed. And so you can see in the previous example, right, we had 6 and 1. Now we're at 24 and 8. So it was 6 and 1. Now it's 24 and 8. All right. And then we get to 3. We're going to go 3 times 3 times 6. And down here it's going to be 3 times 3 times 3. And then we get our answers. Okay, 3 times 3 is 9. 9 times 6 is 54. And then we've got our volume here, 3 times 3 times 3. That gives us 27 centimeters cubed. Okay, so what do you notice about these numbers? Are both the surface area and the volume growing at the same rate as the cell gets bigger? The answer to that is actually no. Both the surface area and the volume are both getting bigger and bigger and bigger, but the volume actually grows relatively more than the surface area does. Okay, so they're actually getting closer, the numbers, just slightly, but it is significant when we're talking the microscopic level. Now, here we have a table, and it should confirm for you by looking at the actual ratios what we were talking about just moments ago. So where is the ratio of the surface area to volume the greatest? So we have a 6-to-1 ratio in the 1 by 1 centimeter cube. We have a 3-to-1 ratio, right, over here under the 2 centimeters. Okay, 3-to-1 here. You got 6-to-1 here, 3-to-1 here, and 2-to-1 here. So where is it biggest? It's biggest right here on the 6-to-1 ratio. So the largest difference between volume and surface area is found in the smallest version of this. So where is the smallest ratio located? Well, that would be in the largest version of our cube over here, where we have a 3 centimeter by 3 centimeter by 3 centimeter cube. So it's only twice as big, the surface area to the volume. So how do you think an even larger cube with sides of, say, 4 centimeters would compare? Well, the ratio of surface area to volume is going to continue getting smaller as that cube gets larger. So, considering the problem of surface area to volume ratio, how could cell growth create a problem that's similar to, say, the traffic jam in a growing town? Well, the answer to that, my friends, is that as a cell grows, it needs more materials in order to cross its membranes. And traffic is comparable to the movement of materials such as nutrients, water, oxygen, even wastes across the cell's membrane. And as the cell grows larger, which increases its volume, the number of traffic lanes, or the amount of surface area to cross, doesn't quite keep up, and the materials can't enter or leave the cell as quickly as is necessary. So you could kind of call it an information crisis. There are too many demands placed on things like DNA. So if the cell if it grows too large, it's not going to have enough relative surface area to get the sufficient amounts of oxygen and other nutrients into the cell and to get the waste products out. So then we have a kind of a traffic problem when the volume grows too fast relative to the surface area. We just can't exchange enough material in the amount of time necessary. Now, another problem is that the movement of those materials, even once they do cross the cell membrane, is going to be far too large. It's going to have to go way too far to get, say, from the cell membrane to the nucleus, right? So the bigger the cell is, the further away the membrane is from the various organelles and so forth inside of the cell that need those nutrients and molecules. So that can become a problem. So in order to solve the surface area to volume ratio faced by a growing cell, an individual cell will simply divide. The division of a cell produces two daughter cells. Now, think about what a cell would have to do before it divides. In other words, like what major components would a cell need? Things like DNA and cytoplasm. And so it's going to need to somehow divvy up all of the material that's already inside the cell so that both cells that result have what it needs. So before it can divide to produce these daughter cells, there has to be enough DNA for both of the cells. So before cell division, the cell actually has to replicate or make a copy of its DNA. And this avoids the problem of information overload. Now, cell division solves the problem of increasing cell size by decreasing the cell volume. By making more cells instead of larger cells, it keeps the surface area to volume ratio really high, which is really good. Now, sometimes students will get the idea that that cells get smaller and smaller and smaller with each successive cell division. But actually, the cells do go through a period of growth after they've divided. So remember that the cell division helps the cell avoid the problems of growing too large, but it's still going to grow larger. Now let's take a look at the differences between asexual and sexual reproduction. And remember that reproduction is really one of the most important characteristics of living things. So for a single-celled organism like a bacterium, it accomplishes this through simple cell division. And this makes the process of reproduction pretty straightforward, and it can allow a population to grow very quickly. This kind of cell division is actually a form of asexual reproduction, which is the production of a genetically identical offspring from a single parent. So there's two important things there. It's a single parent situation, and the offspring are identical. Okay, so those are like the two really important parts to that idea. They both are very important. So let's think about how cell division relates to the process of asexual reproduction. So I'll ask you this: why do bacterial infections spread so quickly through a school? Well, the answer to that is that bacteria can reproduce asexually, so they can reproduce very quickly. And in the right environment, that is very easy for them to do. Places like crowded schools are good places for bacteria to grow and divide and grow and divide and grow and divide. So here we have a couple of interesting images. We have Kalanko and we have a Hydra. And I believe this is the Kalanka and this is a Hydra. And both of these organisms are reproducing asexually. So how do they do this even though they're multicellular organisms? Well, tiny plantlets in the Kalanko can actually break off and they grow into full new plants. And the bud on the Hydra will eventually pinch off to become a separate individual as well. So what do the offspring of all three of these organisms have in common? Well, the offspring actually share the same genetic material identical to their parents. Now, remember at the beginning of this presentation, I mentioned that we wanted to think about how asexual reproduction is related to humans. Well, humans, like other animals, will actually grow and repair their bodies through cell division. But to reproduce themselves, humans use sexual reproduction. So sexual reproduction involves the fusion of two separate parent cells. Okay, now asexual reproduction involves the separation of a single cell, whereas sexual reproduction involves the fusion or joining of the cells. So how do offspring relate genetically to their parents? Are they identical like in asexual reproduction? Well, they're not genetically identical to either one of their parents. They actually inherit some of their genetic information from one parent and some of their genetic information from the other parent. They merge to create kind of a unique new, not kind of, but it does create a unique new combination of genes. Okay, so that is why you are unique from your parents. You may look a lot like your parents, you may act like your parents, and things of that nature, but you still are unique. You're not going to look identical to your parents. Now, some offspring look very similar to their parents, almost like they could be twins, but if you look closely enough, you will find differences. So let's compare asexual and sexual reproduction. Consider how one form of reproduction might be more advantageous than the other. The characteristics that make an organism well adapted to its environment are really critical for its survival. So, under what kind of conditions would it be helpful to be able to create a very large number of offspring in a short period of time? Well, that would be times when resources such as food and space are relatively unlimited. Lots and lots of options for food and space. Then, in that case, fast and vigorous reproduction would be a good thing. But under what conditions would it be useful to have offspring that are genetically identical to the parent? Well, that would be when environmental conditions are very stable. Good time for identical offspring. So, what would be the conditions where it would be helpful to need only one parent to reproduce? Well, if you're in an environment where finding a suitable mate would be difficult or impossible, that would be a good time to be able to reproduce asexually. So, what kind of conditions would it be useful for to have offspring that are not identical to their parent? Why is that a good thing? Well, when environmental conditions are changing and and those kinds of things are happening, new combinations of traits or genes might actually help with survival. So, based on this discussion, can you identify what the advantages and disadvantages of sexual uh, and asexual reproduction are? Think about that as we move on to the next lesson in this chapter.